Hey coders, welcome to the walkthrough showing you some of the basics of how useState and useEffect are going to be used moving forward as of version 16.8 of React. They're going to attempt to push away from the use of class-based components to functional components, since they are easier to read for both people and machines. And they help attempt to solve a lot of the issues that we discussed in our lecture video previous to this one. So right now I have done a fresh Create React app, and I do have these days, also you can check to make sure, especially if you're trying to use an old React project you might have been working on, make sure you have the most up-to-date version of React. As long as it's 16.8 or higher, it will allow you to use the hooks API. Also, on top of that, we have a very basic app. I deleted my public folder and made my own HTML inside of it. I deleted my source folder. I also rewrote my own index.js like the lab will have you do. And then I have Bootstrap enabled on my project, and I have this components folder and a very basic app.jsx inside of it. I've also installed React and React Router DOM in case I wanted to use it. I might not for this demo because that might be your job in the coming lab. So we have a very basic functional app component that displays hello world to the screen with text primary as a Bootstrap class name. Nothing spectacular, very simple and very clean. There's that hello world, and I know Bootstrap is enabled correctly. So let's start building out our application a little bit here and see what we can get going. I'll actually be using a JSON response or JSON REST API testing site called jsonplaceholder.typicode.com. And we can use this website to generate some API responses. You can also choose to test with, again, this Ghibli API like we've been doing in our curriculum to this point, or I actually like using this site a lot for teaching people how to interact with REST APIs and how to use React to render them to the screen. So I'll be taking a simple one here, like maybe the users endpoint, and making a GET request to users via fetch, converting the JSON response to JavaScript, and using React useState and useEffect to get this information and render it to the screen. It's an array of objects, just kind of like the Ghibli API was, if you're starting to notice a pattern or trend to REST APIs out there. So let's go ahead and hit it up. To convert this guy to using state and useEffects, we no longer have to upgrade it to a class-based component with a constructor with a state object to get that information. Like you saw from the lectures, all we have to do is import it at the top of our file. So I can go ahead and bring in my useState hook along with my useEffect hook for usage. From there, I need to define what my state is going to be along with its setter function while I call the useState hook. So we're going to say const array brackets, and this will use some ES6 destructuring in order to get these values, because useState will take a initial value for your state, which in my case will be a blank array. And then from here, it responds or returns an array with two elements inside of it. And with ES6 destructuring, we can take that array, create variables with our own names for those elements. So I want to call mine users, since that's the piece of state that we're altering here, and I want to have a setter function called setUsers. So the variable JavaScript variable users will represent the array of users, and setUsers is what I can call in order to update that piece of state, and that's how we now access state with the React Hooks API. From there, we need to actually make a fetch call. Now, this is not 100% the best way to do it using the useEffect API, and there's actually some node modules out there that you can use to make cleaner and safer fetch calls. But I'm going to show you the basic way to get it up and running. So we need to make a useEffect call, and the useEffect call, if you remember from the lectures, has a callback function that it executes, as well as a secondary argument, which is essentially a dependency for when this effect should run. We can pass in values here to say when those values change, this useEffect needs to run again, which would cause a re-render. So without this particular guy here, without the array, if you do this by mistake, you will actually cause an infinite loop with a fetch inside of this callback function. It will fetch the API information, set it to state, causes a re-render. There's no dependency listed here, so guess what? The useEffect runs again. It makes the very same fetch call. It sets the state. A state set means it's time to re-render. When a re-render happens, there's no dependency telling it not to run, so the useEffect runs again, and go on and so forth. And you're going to cause an infinite loop of fetch requests and probably make that API very mad at you for making that many requests to it. So we have to say, go ahead and pass in this blank array, and this is kind of like a cheating way to say, look for a value inside here, which there's currently none, therefore rerun it when that value changes. But because there's no value in there, it's never going to change, which means this useEffect should never rerun unless it's about to mount to the DOM. So it's kind of like a component did mount, but not really, and that's the way we're going to have to handle it. If you like using the fetch.then promise chaining method, you can go ahead and, I believe, write out your logic inside of your curly brace. But if you're like me and you like the async await syntax, you would think you can write async in front of this function call and go ahead and write your let await promises in here. And this will actually throw an error because by definition, async functions will implicitly return promises. And this callback function cannot do that. It is syntactically wired in the React library to, if it returns any function whatsoever, that function simulates a cleanup function, so to speak, something like a component will unmount or something akin to that. We don't really care about a cleanup function here, but we want to use async await. So how are we going to do that? Well, because we're working in a JavaScript functional component file, we don't have to worry about class-based methods and lifecycles and all that. All we have to do is write our own pure JavaScript function, just a const get users, that's what I'm going to call it. It's going to be an asynchronous function that requires no arguments that is going to run our fetch call for us. So I'll say let res equal await the promise to resolve of going to the fetch request. And I don't know if I copied the value string or not, but we're not going to find out. So I'm going to do a fresh copy and paste like so. And then after that, I am going to say let users equal await the response.json promise to resolve, and then after that I'll go ahead and run my setter function of set users, and I will pass in the new value of users. So I'm passing in this local users variable to the set users function, which should update my piece of state and trigger a re-render. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and call get users inside of my useEffect function, or hook function. And I'm going to leave the return with the hello world, and let's confirm that we're not making a bunch of fetch calls and we're setting state one time. Hopefully it just ran as is, no problem. And down here we have our hooks state, and we have an array of 10 users, which is the correct response that we were looking for from our code. So from there, we can go ahead and do the classic React mapping. We can just map through this list of users, because we've successfully set them to state, we've successfully fetched them, and we can map through. So I'm going to go ahead and make a div container. For bootstrap purposes, I'll have a div with the row. I want to make sure this thing expands the entire width of the row, so we'll say it's a call 12. Inside of there, I will do an unordered list with list group on it. I think it's list dash group. Oops. Well, I just messed up IntelliSense, so give me a second here. List group, class name, there we go. And inside of here as well, I'll take my piece of state, aka users. No more having to write this.state.users. I can just take the variable users, map through that, and each instance will be one user object that I want to run an implicit return on, and the implicit return is going to be a list item. And that list item will have a class name value of list-group-item. And I'm going to render each user object, and I think the property we're looking for is something called .name, and we're going to run that here in just a second. So user.name, and for React purposes, don't forget to add your key onto this JSX code. So user.id will be the key for this list item group. And so let's see what runs now and check it out. We got it up and running nice and well. So we now have made a fetch call using useEffect instead of a component lifecycle. We've also ran and updated a piece of state that triggered this re-render with this list of users in here, and we all got it running without ever writing a lick of class-based component code. So we have these JavaScript functions that are easy to use and share across files, and we can even write custom useEffect hooks that are specifically meant for fetching data. And I think I'll have some links below this video for some extra reading material if you guys are curious on how we can more effectively use these guys. And remember what I mentioned in the lecture video, these guys are not a one-for-one recreation of lifecycle methods. So when you approach these effects, you have to come in with a different mindset. Don't think lifecycle methods anymore. Just think of an effect, a side effect I want to run at a certain time, and you can control when that time is. After this video, there should be a lab where you're going to be building using React Router DOM a 2 or 3 page component that will do something similar to this to make sure you understand how to use these guys effectively. So if you have any questions, leave them in the video below, hit us up in Discord, and I hope you'll have fun experimenting with the new API of hooks available on React. So I'll talk to y'all later.